सुनाई दे रहा है क्या?
हाँ, आवाज क्लियर आ रही है ना? एक मिनट, पावर पॉइंट भी मैं लाइन पे लेता हूँ। मैं अपन लाइव है इस समय, है ना मनीष? हाँ, ठीक है। हेलो फ्रेंड्स एंड वेलकम वंस अगेन। और इस बार हम एक मतलब ये सेशन हमको बहुत दिन पहले करना था, ऑलमोस्ट 2 वीक पहले, लेकिन हम कर नहीं सके कुछ रीजंस के कारण। तो आज हम इसको कर रहे हैं और मैं मतलब टाइम वेस्ट नहीं करता हूँ। लेट्स स्टार्ट। ओवर टू मनीष। मनीष, मैं इनविजिबल रहूंगा क्योंकि मेरा डेटा बहुत प्रॉब्लम कर रहा है, तो यू टेक केयर ऑफ इट। मैं बैकग्राउंड में सब देखता रहूंगा, है ना? तो ओवर टू
ठीक
यू
है।
मनीष।
यू कैन हियर मी प्रॉपर्ली? मैं सुनाई दे रहा है? वॉल्यूम
सुनाई दे रहा है?
ओके, परफेक्ट। Alright, good evening everybody. Let me see. I see 3. Can you all hear me? अभी आवाज आ रही है? Oh, thank you. So, काफी दिनों से वेट कर रहे थे एस्ट्रो फोटोग्राफी के लिए, तो लेट्स गेट स्टार्टेड। मैं इस सेशन के बाद आई विल शेयर ये जो स्लाइड्स दिखा रहा हूँ, आई विल पुट इट ऑन आवर व्हाट्सएप पेज, तो एवरीबॉडी विल हैव इट। अगर आप लोग देखें कि मैं इस तरफ देख रहा हूँ तो दैट्स माय स्क्रीन, इधर मेरा लैपटॉप है जिसका कैमरा मैं यूज कर रहा हूँ। सो फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल, इंट्रोडक्शन। मैं ओरिजिनली रायपुर से हूँ एंड रजनीश और मैं स्कूल गए थे साथ में, and I currently live in Dallas. I actually work in healthcare. I'm a director of healthcare economics, एक pediatric hospital के साथ. I enjoy food, obviously, all kinds of food, and travel that goes with camera as well. Travel internationally, domestically, and road tripper हूँ. And usually when I travel in domestically, it's always I try to drive. So I have driven through 46 states, and I actually have a big map. It's not hanging in my office. In that map, I always have marked every single road I have taken to date, and it's pretty much full. The first time I started photography was actually with my dad's camera. It was a Yashica mat, and you actually can see that. Oops. I don't know if you can see the camera up there on the corner. That's the camera that I started with. My more photography ज़्यादा serious हुआ late 90s में. Hello, Face, Bablu, Rajiv, I can see only your names. Can you hear me? Because I think there's somebody I'm seeing as Facebook user. They are not hearing the sound. Hello? Okay, perfect. Unfortunately, I only see 2 names. Everybody else is showing as Facebook user, so I cannot tell who is asking the question. Okay, thank you. So I started in the 1990s with a Minolta SLR, and then eventually got Sony DSLT, which Sony took over Minolta's camera business. And then I added a mirrorless camera as well in 2011. So today I still have 3 cameras, but my main camera is Sony A9, which is a full frame camera. And I also shoot with Sony Alpha NEX6, which is an old camera, but it still works. So for this particular exercise, I will focus more on my A9 because that's what I use, but I also use NEX6 when I need to. Sometimes I use put both on tripods and take pictures. So before we proceed, let's go over some of the basics, because some of these basics will actually tie into what is needed when we shoot astrophotography. So for example, if you're just shooting landscape, it really doesn't matter what size of camera. Even a cell phone camera can take pretty decent pictures, unless there is a high contrast scene. Then a small sensor can show up issue with issues, but generally not an issue. With astrophotography, there is a challenge that you are shooting pretty much in dark and for a long time. So you have to use very high ISO. So I'm going to focus mostly on APS-C and full frame, which is probably the most common formats we all use. But if you do use Micro Four Thirds or any other camera, let me know and I will try to cover those cameras as well. So full frame camera, the sensor is about 24 mm by 636 millimeters. APS-C camera 50% smaller है दोनों side में, so it's about 16 millimeter by 24 millimeter. So as a result of the size difference, full frame sensor is 1.5 times bigger on each side. This 1.5 times bigger causes what we call the crop factor. So what is a crop factor though? Crop factor is basically it crops the image. So if you're using a full frame lens on a full frame camera and then use the same lens on an APS-C camera, the focal length is not changing. What changes is how much you see. And you see about 2.25 times less from that same lens on APS-C than you do on the full frame. That's 1.5 times crop factor. Okay, so it's more, if the right way of saying it is, the crop factor is like if you are using a 50 millimeter lens on full frame, if you use that lens on APS-C camera, it will function more like a 75 millimeter lens, but not on APS-C, but as if you are using a 75 millimeter lens on a full frame. So 50 millimeter lens on APS-C will give you the same angle of view as a 75 millimeter lens will give you on a full frame. So we have to keep this in mind, because astrophotography and not about the field of view, but how long you can expose your shots. That's where the crop factor will come into play. Okay. Moving on to the basics. So what I just said is basically covered here. Focal length is the point from the front of the lens to a point on the plane of the sensor that allows light from infinity to basically be focused. So shorter focal length camera will provide a wider view of the scene. We already know that. अगर आप 20 millimeter lens use करें तो you see a much wider field of view, and as you go 300 mm, your field of view is very narrow. There is an effect of this. What happens is when you are using a wide lens, the scenery gets actually stretched. Gets pushed outside. The reverse happens when you use a longer focal length. The image kind of gets compressed and brought forth, and that's why we see as if it's like a magnification effect. It's not really magnification, but it's a magnification effect. Okay, and we already discussed the single focal length will provide two different field of view. So I actually use APS-C and full frame and shared lenses between the two. So when I'm using 12 millimeter lens on my full frame, it gives me a wide view. It's actually a hyper wide view of the scene. When I use the same lens on my APS-C camera, it actually gives me still a very ultra wide view, but it's not as wide as it is on full frame. But still, when I say focal length, it's the same. It's just that 12 millimeter lens on APS-C camera works more like an 18 lens on my full frame camera. So 1.5 times so the important thing to remember is we always talk about, and this is a discussion that a lot of people have outside of astrophotography, that crop factor, and how the focal length changes. Focal length doesn't change, field of view changes, how much you see and capture. Let's quickly go over our exposure trial. I know you all already know about pretty much everything that we are covering here, but if there are some people who are new and would like to know, and they will have this PowerPoint presentation shortly, this may be useful at some point. So aperture is basically what we're talking about is the opening through the lens. We measure it in f-stops, and its f-stop is basically focal length of the camera divided by a numerical value. A numerical value is actually calculated using a logarithmic equation, which we will not have to cover here, but if you want, I can do that as well. And usually the lenses are graduated in full stop, and these are some of the full stops that I have shown, the most common ones, f0.95, not so common, but plenty of lenses with that, f1.4, then the next stop is 2, 2.8, 4, and so on. As the anybody having audio issues still? Okay. So those are the full stops, but you also have the third stops and half stops. We don't need to worry too much into those details. One thing I will also cover as part of exposure trial or triangle is the apex exposure system. Apex exposure system basically is a good thing to know, not necessarily for astrophotography. For everything, you can actually get a good grasp on how the exposure triangle actually works. In astrophotography, although not with cameras, with telescopes and all, we are actually talking. That's actually a good term to know about. Clear aperture is simply your focal length divided by the f-stop value. So if you have a 100 millimeter lens and you are at f2, the clear aperture is 50 millimeter. Now in actual lenses, it's not really an opening of 50 millimeter, but in telescopes that's how it works. But the concept works with camera lenses also. Now, as much as we talk about f-stop, that if it gets dark, let's use a faster f-stop, right? If you look at the cinema lenses, the lenses that are used by the cine industry, they are never rated at f-stops. They are always rated at t-stops, which is the transmission stop. It is the transmission. So what happens is when these lenses are built, they have a lot of glass elements through which the light has to pass, and each of them probably reflect and deflect a little bit of the light. So not all of the light makes it through to the sensor. So even though you assume, oh, it's an f2 lens, so all f2 lenses provide the same amount of light through them. No, that's not how it works, unfortunately. However, there is a way we rate lenses based on the t-stop. If it is a t2.0, then it is T2.0. It may be f1.8 or it may be f2.8. Usually it's not 2.2, but it may be f1.8 or f2. And if it is T2.0, it really doesn't matter what the f-stop is. So t-stop is really the more accurate measure of how much light goes through. Now for astrophotography, where you are challenged with how much light you have available, it's always good to have a lens that has a very fast t-stop. Obviously, most cameras don't come with t-stops rated. I have a few that actually do say the t-stop, but I would say that prime lenses are a better option than zoom because zooms actually have more complex design, so they tend to lose more light through them. But if that's what you have, that's perfectly fine. There will be very minimal, if not even noticeable difference in light transmission. So you will capture what you need to, but ideally you want as fast of a t-stop as possible. And we will, once we are done with this, we will have a Q&A session. So if you have questions, keep that in mind and throw it my way. As right after we'll address all of those. The next thing is shutter speed. So we know how much light is allowed at any given point in time using aperture. The wider the aperture, more light is getting through. But how long is determined by the shutter speed. And shutter speed, just like f-stop, is also graduated in full stops as well as thirds and halves. And shutter speed is really determined by how long the curtain or the shutter allows the sensor or the film to be exposed. That's basically the time we are talking about here. Um, and I forgot to mention something with aperture, that the apex, and we will look at apex system eventually. It assigns every stop is assigned, and every half stop or third stop is actually assigned a numerical value, starting with 0, and it goes up from there. And likewise, you have shutter speed also assigned, and we will call it the time value. Choice for shutter speed is dictated by what you're shooting, obviously. If you're shooting action and you want to freeze the motion, you want a very fast shutter speed. Sometimes the opposite is what you want. You want to motion blur something like a waterfall or the waves. You want to basically make a good idea is if you're shooting at a lake and you see ripples, you probably don't want to see the ripples. You probably want like a glass surface with reflection. It will be a good idea to just use a long shot exposure. Now, shutter speed obviously will depend on how much light is coming through. If it is dark, it's easier to extend and always shoot at the lowest ISO if that's what you're wanting, long exposure. Um, but sometimes you also want motion blur, like a combination of action. And I have an image from my neighborhood rodeo place where I shot this lady riding a horse. The horse and the lady are in relative focus, so they are relatively sharp, but everybody behind them is sort of moving. That's a motion blur. So I used a very small, it's much easier to take this kind of a picture when you're shooting cars, auto racing. And it's actually a good thing to practice. Even with regular traffic, you can practice it. As long as they move fast enough, you actually can capture some of this effect. And one thing I will say is it's more difficult to do it with a horse because the horse is not just moving in a straight direction, they actually are jumping up and down. So yes, it's a panning shot. So you pan, you make sure you are on the subject and you pan and you keep your shutter speed low. I might have kept it here 1/50th or 1/40th of a second. With cars, you can even go slower because they are not jumping like this. They are pretty much going straight line. So it's easier to get them in focus. Most cameras will offer 1/4000th of a second as the fastest to 30 seconds. And often they will have the bulb mode. I would say in this particular, in Astro, you probably want the bulb mode or at least a 20 to 30-second exposure time. In some cases, you will have cameras which start at 1/8000th of a second, mostly full frame cameras, and some advanced APS-C cameras will have that. And in my case, I can actually stop it to 1/32,000th of a second. But obviously, that's not useful for Astro because that's way too fast. I only use it when I'm shooting with f0.95 or f1.2 lenses in bright sunlight. Then the third one is the ISO. ISO is, we'll refer to it as the speed value. And speed value is called speed value because during the film days, it was actually called the film speed. So again, just like aperture and shutter, there is an apex value assigned to each stop of ISO, and like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. Some people don't consider ISO to be part of the exposure triangle, but you can't have a triangle without a third side. So I'm going to cover it. ISO basically refers to the sensitivity. So the more sensitive the sensor is to light, the more light it will absorb. And opposite is true. So for higher sensitivity, you use a higher ISO. That's why in dark areas, when you have less light, you increase the ISO, and that's how you capture the picture. If you use ISO 100, it will probably come out dark. So for astrophotography, you will end up using very high ISOs. usually 3200 to 6400. Digital sensors. Now, this is not necessarily, since we are going to shoot high ISO, that's what we are going to be left with. But for landscape, I would say always try to stick with your native ISO. Usually it is between 100 and 200. Some cameras have 125, some have 100, some have 160. It's usually between 100 and 200. As long as you are in that range, you'll get the best picture. So if it is too slow and you have a shake issue, then hopefully camera stabilization will work. If not, use a tripod. That's mostly for landscape. Many cameras also offer extended ISO. So my camera also does that. So it's the base. Some cameras actually have multiple native ISOs too. So they may have 100 and a 640. Things like Sony A7R series actually has dual native ISOs. That actually then you can shoot at 640 or 100 and you'll get the same image quality. Many cameras also offer extended ISO. Extended is basically like it's real ISO starts at 100, but they also using software. They actually allow you to go 50, which is useful if it is too bright and your camera doesn't support very fast shutter speed and you want to slow it down. You use ISO 50, but I would recommend against it unless absolutely necessary or the conditions permit, because you actually do lose dynamic range, color, and everything using extended. And this is what I was talking about as the apex system, is the exposure triangle. So we have discussed aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. Um, apex is a very simple scale-based system. So you're looking at the chart here. I have value 0. Oops, sorry. I have a value of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Aperture value is basically the f-stop. If you notice, 0.95, which is my baseline f-stop, has a value of 0, and with each stop, it goes up. Likewise, time value starts at 1 second, and then it goes up from there. Speed value starts at ISO 3.125, which we will never see. We usually see from 50 and generally from 200. If you are from film days or still shoot, you probably are familiar with 25 as well. All of these values are assigned a numeric value. And then to obtain the correct exposure, so when you're shooting outside, how does your camera light meter work? That's actually how it works. There is a simple equation, and I have here exposure value is aperture value plus time value is equal to brightness value plus speed value. Brightness value is how bright the scene is. Speed value is your sensitivity of the sensor or the film, aperture value, and time value. During bright daylight is somewhere between 9 and 10. It's actually 9.6 is the standard brightness value. So if you substitute the value, if you want to know what the third value should be, so let's say if its brightness value is 9 and I'm using ISO 100, so that's 5. So that's 9 plus 5 is 14. Oh, are you? Okay, so don't worry about it. And I will. For some reason, it might not be showing up the chart. So what I'm going to do is it will be part of. I'll share all this, but I'll just go over it how it is calculated. Oh, the panning picture is here. You cannot see it. All right, let me reshare the screen. I think some are having issue. Is this better? Oh, sorry. Can you see it now? Oh, sorry. So I'll just quickly go over some of this. So this is the panel. Get stuck here. I'm guessing you can see it now. Okay. So this is the panning chart I was talking to you earlier about. Let me see if this is. Sorry, I have to figure out how to share the two screens. Let me see if I can. If it still works if I do this. So we talked about ISO, and there is the. Can you see the table now? Okay, thank you. So that's the table I was talking about. So here is the equation: aperture value plus time value is equal to brightness value plus speed value. So when we are talking about brightness value of the day, let's say we are shooting at a daytime, which is pretty bright, it's 9. Speed value, let's say we are using ISO 100. Anukriti, you're having, Bablu, you can see, right? Anukriti is having issue. I see Bablu. Is it visible? No. Hello? Okay. Um, okay. So if the brightness value is daytime is 9, this is I'm showing you how to use it and how exposure triangle works here. So it's not really Astro, but in general. So you have brightness value of 9. Your speed value of ISO 100 is 5. So you put 5 here, so that's 14. And then let's say you are using an aperture of 2.8, or actually say f8, because that's what you'll use normally for scenery. F8 is 6. So that will be 6 years. So that way you can actually calculate what the time value will be. You move this 6 over here. So you have 14 minus 6 is 8. And 8 is 1 by 258th of a second. So if you're shooting manual, this chart can actually show you what your settings will approximately be. Okay? So that's basically what I wanted to cover with that. Let's see if I can just click. I don't want to mess up again, but I can't see the screen then. Now, let's jump into astrophotography. So obviously for this exercise, what we are going to need is the minimum equipment. You obviously need your camera, full frame or APS-C, although you can also use small sensors, but small sensor problem will be too much noise. So I would recommend using FF or APS-C. I use Sony A9, which is full frame. I also use Sony NEX6, which is APS-C. A lens that should not be any slower. Oh, you're still stuck on the. All right, let me. Can you see it now? The next slide. Okay. So obviously you need a full frame or an APS-C camera. You need a lens that is no slower than f2.8. Now you can use slower lenses also. The problem is your image will be very dark. All right, focal length choice can be personal. Now we discussed about the wide angle versus telephoto. You can actually use telephoto as well. There are benefits to it, but there are downsides as well, and we will cover on those shortly. I personally prefer wide angle to ultra wide or hyper wide. Um, I personally use Laowa 2.8, and which I use on both on full frame and APS-C. I use Zeiss Loxia 21 2.8, which is on full frame. So Zeiss Loxia 21 would be like using a 14 millimeter lens on APS-C camera. I also use sometimes, it's for fun, a Rokinon 8mm fisheye lens. And the cool thing about it is sometimes we actually end up capturing us, all the photographers, because it has a 300, almost 180-degree field of view. So if you are anywhere close to the camera, it will capture you as well as the sky. So it can be a cool effect, but that's exactly the only thing I use it for. You can also have a light pollution filter. A light pollution filter can be very expensive or it can be very cheap. I personally don't recommend spending those. Although there are some cheaper forms which are not sold as light pollution filter. It's called the intensifier filter. There is a filter called intensifier type. Actually, I have found it to work effectively. However, I don't use filters at all. In fact, if you have a UV filter or anything, I would say take it out because you are already running low on light and you want as much light as possible to reach your sensor. Okay, we already talked about T-stop. T-stop is already challenged by all the lens elements, and on top of it, if you start adding filters, you lose even more light, even if it is a clear filter. A sturdy tripod is extremely important. Now, if you don't have a tripod, you can still get away with it. Um, is that better? Let's see if I can, but I'm afraid I might lose the slide again. Um, let's see if I can. Okay. So अगर आपके पास tripod अच्छा strong tripod नहीं है, then you can actually use like a bag, like a cement, some kind of a bora में आप रेत डाल के you can use it as just to hold the camera down so it doesn't move at all. You can also, if you have a tripod but it's kind of not very heavy, अगर उसमें hook है, then you can hang your camera down so it wind वगैरह से थोड़ा सा भी वो blow नहीं करेगा. So you can actually have it pretty hard. I actually have two tripods, one travel and one kind of sturdy. In both, I will hang something so it doesn't move at all. Because यहाँ पे you are looking at a very long exposure time. And stars इतने छोटे छोटे हैं कि you don't want any streak on top of it. Okay. Remote trigger, that is a requirement. Although if you use timer, you can use timer also on the camera, but having a remote trigger obviously is easy. The remote trigger, it's there. Sometimes you can find very cheap ones too. But ideally you want to use a remote trigger. I'm talking about red torch headlamp. So what is red torch? Red torch is basically अपना torch है, उसमें बस red bulb होना चाहिए. And the reason is when you are looking for these locations where you will be shooting, it will be so dark that अगर आप regular torch use करेंगे, तो you actually lose sight of, you cannot see the stars for a while. And if you're shooting with other people also, it's always a good idea to consider them because you don't want to disturb with bright light. Red is the best color for shooting with Astro. If you are shooting with, even when you are looking up through telescope, the color of flashlight to use. We have this headlamp, and it actually has both. One side is white and one side is red. So I will use only the red one when I'm shooting Astro. And obviously, this is only when you are trying to basically work with your finding out a lens or working with adjustments on your camera. That's the only time you want it on anyway. You want to turn it off right after. But if you're using flashlight in the dark, I would say always try to get something like this. I also have a flashlight which does basically the same thing. It is red. In this one, actually, I have different arrangements. So I just change over to white, green, red, whatever. But for Astro, red light. You'll be there for a while. So chair, drinks, and most of the time you will be in places which will be completely dark. So insects, snakes, be prepared for all of that. Dress appropriately. Cover your feet to make sure nothing gets through. You can also carry with you, say, flash and LEDs and regular flashlight, etc. Um, because you can use them to create effects. And I will show a couple of those in the following slides. And I hope the slide moves. So if it doesn't, let me know. Can everybody see the new slide? Hello? Okay, perfect. So the first thing I would say is you have to know, for astrophotography, you have to know where the stars will be. Now we have stars all over the place, but in with the shooting, the kind of shooting you're going to do, you are probably going to be most interested in our galaxy's center core itself that we see at night. Now it's very difficult in India, and you can see the map of India, and I have a part of India covered on that one, and you can see how city lights affect the sky. For most places, we are not even able to see the stars properly because of pollution, because of light pollution. But that's one part. The real part is, okay, where exactly is the sun? I mean, sorry, the galactic arms themselves, right? I use an app called Stellarium, and I've been using this long before I started astrophotography. And Stellarium is a cool website, and let me share that. I hope it works fine. Again, I'm going to use a screen, and hopefully you can actually see it. Can you see the screen? I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong one, Stellarium. So this is the Stellarium site. Actually, I may have to redo my sharing screen. Can you see the screen? दिखाई दे रहा है नया screen? I'm actually sharing Stellarium. I think there is a delay of some kind. थोड़ा देर लगता है उसको आने में. Can you see it? Okay. So Stellarium is a very fun tool actually. I do it more than just for Astro. So here is what you can do. You can download, this is also available on your phones, and which is how you will be using it. And what I am showing you is actually on the web. So this is the web version of it, but you can download the app and you will have the name when I share the PowerPoint presentation. If you see here, I can actually change the location. This is currently what it looks like. Obviously, this is not Dallas, but it just has this graphics to show it is a daylight. This is looking north, and I can actually remove the atmosphere. So atmosphere is basically when we see what the blue sky is really the atmosphere showing us the real sky is dark. So I can remove this atmosphere using that. And now you can see that this is actually, if we didn't have an atmosphere, this is what our sky will look like. Now here is the interesting thing, and you can move this around. So the sun is obviously right above here, and you can actually see there's a cool thing right there. I don't know if you can see it moving. That's our International Space Station. So this software keeps track of all of that stuff. You can actually zoom into and learn about all the stars, planets, and there's the comet. Actually, that's a good opportunity to shoot as well, is this comet. Swan, it's actually visible at an early morning also. You can get the comet's tail if you use long enough. I can go and change that location. Let's say I want to change it to Bhopal. Now it is dark over there. So I'm going to say use this location. So on your phone, you can just set your location tracker already. So it will automatically show you where you are, but you can also pre-plan because you will probably be not shooting Astro from Bhopal because of too much light in the sky. You have to go just outside, maybe somewhere. We'll actually look at the light pollution there, and then we'll talk about it. So this is your currently, if you were able to see all the stars, this is what your star will look like. Oh, look at that. If you look east, this is our galaxy. And you basically will be able to see if you didn't have light pollution or city pollution. Jupiter is just above the horizon from where you are right now. Okay. So this is a very, and here's another cool thing about it. On the right side, you see the, now phone app is slightly different, but you have the same features available. So you'll have to play a little bit. You can even look at the constellations in the sky. And if I remove that, put the atmosphere, this is basically what the atmosphere effect is at this time in Bhopal. This is when the atmosphere is removed. But now you can actually see where the galactic arm, the main, our center of our galaxy is, which is about here. All right. And you can change the time also. And what this, I don't know. Okay. Okay. Now what I can do here is I can change the date and time, and you will see the there's some delay here, but see how the galaxy is moving. So you can actually plan your site where, so this will give you an idea of what time you want to be shooting at, which direction you should be looking at, and location. We will use another app which to find a place where you can actually see the stars more clearly than this. You can actually set the date too, so you can plan ahead, say on for some reason it's not responding as well, but it's not an easy, I think it's a sharing thing that is causing the problem, otherwise it moves. I can actually change it to June 30th and still see where the on that day the galaxy will be visible. Okay, so this will help you plan. Now obviously with astrophotography you always want to plan around new moon, when there is no moon or very little moon, because moonlight will also add to the light pollution and you will not be able to see as well as the moon will actually overwhelm the sky, so you will not see it as effectively. So it's always to be planned around the 3 or 4 days around the new moon, अमावस्या की रात के आसपास, 2-3 दिन पहले या 2-3 दिन बाद. So this is Stellarium software. The next thing I want to discuss is a light pollution map. Now there are multiple maps software. This is the one I use. And you can see this right now, it's centered on my hometown here, Dallas area. So you can see how badly light pollution affects us. This is Dallas area. This is Houston area. This is about 400 kilometer ka journey hai ye. And you see, if I travel from Dallas to Houston, there is hardly any place that has this dark skies. It's all bright. Actually, along the highways, it's pretty much never black. There are some blue and dark blue areas. We'll talk about that shortly. But see how badly the whole light pollution thing is. For me, the best spots are actually here and down here. Both of these actually, usually my view of the galaxy is to the south and southeast, this way. So this site works well because I have minimum, there is some light pollution here, but not as bad. Here, I can go up here also, but in that case, I might probably have more light than I have here. And here it's actually even better, but I usually go up here because it's more convenient. It's just a straight drive. Okay, so let's do this. Let's go see if I can book out. We can just zoom out. Oh, another thing. India may, I don't know, any dark sky place exists, but here you can see, barely see. Actually, let me remove the layers. You see here, this is actually a dark sky spot, which is Big Bend National Park. That's really dark. I have not shot Astro there, but one day I want to go there. It's about 8-9 hours drive from Dallas. It's about 900 kilometers, but it's pretty nice place to be. There are some mountains, there is a river, and there is real dark. If you go to a dark side, even this spot where I normally go to, and you actually saw it, we'll go back to it. It's so dark, you feel like you can touch the galaxy. It's like cloud, and you cannot see what is in front of you without a light. It's very dark. We have to find some place like that, but if you can't, it's easy. I would say darkest of these navy blue or blue is borderline that gives a decent view. So let's take a look at what it looks like near Bhopal. See, USA, the first third of the USA has more than half of the population of the country. There is virtually no dark spot here. We are actually lucky that there is less, and this side is kind of desert area, so it's not a lot of people. And there is India. And here you can easily see some of the bigger cities. That's Bhopal, that's Indore. That's that much. No, actually, this is Nagpur, this is Raipur, Durg, Bhilai. This is Mumbai, Bangalore, and all that, Chennai, Calcutta, Delhi. So let's get closer to Bhopal. Fortunately, there are areas, all these gray areas is where you are going to get the best view. So you have to plan. If you plan Astro, this is where you want to be. Oh, this is Nagpur actually. So Bhopal is right here. So there is Indore, there is Bhopal. So there is a small pocket which will be good, but then this area is probably closer. So you really have to, there's Vidisha. So I think if you drive east of Vidisha into this area, you will have a very good view of the sky. There is Garatganj. So if you are somewhere in this area, or actually even better, if you are in this area, you will get a real good. One thing I would say is take the picture of the sky, but also try to get something in the foreground. to get effect. But obviously, to practice, just start with the simple stuff, and then scout, find a location which works best, which gives you a lot of options. So that's the second app, light pollution map, and I have included this in the slide. So hopefully this will help. Now let's go back. Oh, before I change the slide, this is what I was telling you about, that if you can create some light effects. You see the, can you see the windows? The window is blue, so we put a LED lights inside the church. We actually got permission to shoot here beforehand, and we actually went inside, put some lights in there, and then that helped us create an effect. There's too much light at this light pollution at this location, but that's okay. There's not many locations that are open right now. Okay. Light pollution is measured in a unit called Bortel. Bortel 3 or 4 is like that blue, dark blue area. Bortel 1 and 2 is like the gray, dark gray area. Bortel 1 is the best. It's the darkest. Bortel 2 is what I get here. 3 and 4, not so dark, but it's good enough. Anything more than that, you're probably not going to get a good picture. And we already just discussed this, and I'm showing the Dallas area. So this is where, this is what Bortel 2 looks like. And again, oops. Sorry. So here you can see, again, some red light. We actually use our red flash lamps to just light up and create an additional effect. This is shot with a 12 mm lens, so it's very, it is hyper wide. So now let's get back to photography. How do we shoot it? Because we have talked about what the exposures are, what camera and stuff that you will need, and what tools, like the applications we just talked about, like Stellarium, will allow you to find out where exactly is the thing that you want to shoot. And then light pollution map, for example, the one I shared. There are others as well, but that's the one I like. And in fact, it will also, some also come with weather map. So if you have clouds, obviously that's not going to help. So you can overlay with the clouds and see if actually it's a good time to go and shoot. And then finally, you have to shoot. So this is where we talk about shooting. You can obviously shoot any focal length. I personally prefer 12 or 21, 12 to 21, because I like to have something in the foreground. Everybody can see the screen, right? Let me know, otherwise I don't want to be talking without you being able to read it. So the benefit of a short focal length is you can get the ambience. Like in this one, you can see the church, you can see the stars. Now this is a different type of photography, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit. But the point is, this was shot with a 14 mm lens by one of my friends, and this one has a lot of coverage. So we don't only get the stars, but also we get the surroundings as well, which is what you'll get with a wide angle, ultra wide, or hyper wide lens. It also allows longer exposure. Now we are going to touch on that shortly, so keep that in mind. Okay, long focal length actually can also be very impressive. It's like if you shoot, say, a full moon, try using your shooting the full moon against a building in the distance, right? If you are using 300, 400 millimeter lens, zoom into the moon, but not just the moon. Try to cover something in front of it, like a city, like a house or something. And suddenly you will see that the moon looks more pronounced. It looks like a mightier figure than just a shot of the moon. And what that allows us to, what that is doing is basically it's compressing the image. A long focal length will compress the image, and it brings it a more, it makes it more authority, like it stands out like an authority, the moon itself. You can get the same effect with the galaxy. However, the problem with long focal length is you are actually limited to how long you can shoot before you start to see the star trails, because our Earth is rotating. And the part of that rotation is it takes 4 minutes less than 24 hours. And there is a movement of the stars that gets captured. Show up as rather than points. And you want points for most cases unless you are going for the effect you see on against this church. Here it's actually the streak that we went after. Okay, and we will cover both. Um, Now this particular, so let's talk about this situation. In this one, you have heard of Polaris or the North Star. So you actually have to use the app. We talked about Stellarium. Just say Polaris or North Star, and it should find you that star, and you can find the location of it. Just make sure it is right in the middle of your camera focus point. Okay, and then you just shoot for a long time, maybe 5 minutes. Here you will need the bulb mode. You cannot use the timer with 30 seconds. You probably need 2 to 5 minutes of exposure for each streak, and you actually will be shooting for a while, not just once, 5 minutes, but actually you made this particular shot was taken with 12 frames, actually 12 times. Each frame is 5 minutes long, and that's how you get the streaks. And if you are able to put the star right in the middle, you will get a very perfect circular streak like this one. All right. Um, let's go to the rules and the settings. So once you have your camera and lens on the tripod, you use a star. Just look at one star and get the focus, because really it doesn't have to be pinpoint, but stars are so far that it's going to be pretty much in focus once you are near infinity. Now, manual focus lenses are easier. Let me show you. I have, well, that's my go-to setup, the 21 mm lens with my A9. But here is another lens. This is the Laowa 12 mm lens. Oops, this one. So here you will see the infinity point. Now, most lenses will not have infinity focus at that final point. It's usually just before it. So if you're using a manual lens, it's easier to manipulate it. What I will do is I will go all the way to the end and then move it just very slightly and then go from there, fine tune it. Okay. Now, as you may notice that this Zeiss Loxia lens is actually manual focus lens. So I actually like to shoot manual focus even when I'm shooting people sometimes. But for Astro, manual focus is what you should be using. But if you have an autofocus lens, which most of us will have normally, like this one is a Sony Zeiss 1635 2.8 lens. So what I normally do is, and these lenses don't have um, those markings of the infinity, and sometimes they just turn. You don't know where the infinity is. So what I would do is go slow. Well, this one actually has a marking, but most modern lenses don't actually have that, or the newer lenses, I should say. So you have to just find out where it is, set the manual focus. In most cameras, you'll probably zoom into that focus point and then get the focus and then zoom out. And once if you do use autofocus for some reason, just if your camera lens has this switch to switch from autofocus to manual focus, right after you switch, oops, you pushing the wrong thing. You change the focus from autofocus to manual, so it doesn't move. Because if you leave it on autofocus, if there is a chance that when you are shooting, it might move and you will get blurry stars, autofocus stars, which you don't want. All right. So with that said, you also want to shoot raw mode. Do not shoot JPEG. And if you need a lesson on RAW versus JPEG and how to process those, we can touch on those. Most of your cameras will actually come with free RAW processor anyway. And there's a variety of reasons for shooting RAW. Sure, Anugrit, you have a question or you want to hold on to the question Q&A session? We are almost there. Maybe one more slide. So you shoot RAW and RAW advantage is that you can change the settings later. And one of white balance, if you shoot with auto white balance, the light pollution and the sky pollution in general will actually create an orangish glow. So it will be actually a warmer image than you want it to be. So if you have a lot of light pollution, I would say change to, well, actually that is on the next screen. So maybe I'll just touch on that later. Single frame shooting. So what we are doing here is, what I'm showing you here is basically you take one shot. That's how you want to start. And then you go into advanced mode where you are shooting multiple frames like this image that I'm sharing here. That's 12 different frames. And you can be creative on how it is done. 12 different frames for 5 minutes each. You can do that. Or you just shoot one 20-second shot and you get your image. I would say start that way and then move on to the multiple frame processing, because you are basically going to spend a lot of time merging, stacking them. So you can obviously start right away, but it just takes more post processing. But you are just starting, just start with a single frame shooting. Now, when you are shooting single frame, you can follow one of the two rules. One is the 500 rule and another is 400 rule. Now, for most of us, 500 rule works just fine. The difference between the two is really that 500 rule allows you to expose a little longer than 400 rule. That's really the only difference. What that means is really simple. Whatever is your focal length that you're using, I should say field of view now, but we'll just stick with focal length. So you divide, let's say I'm using a full frame lens that is 25 millimeter on a full frame camera. I divide 500 by 25. That gives me 20 seconds. So that will be the longest I want to shoot if I'm using a 25 millimeter lens. So my shutter speed will be set at 20 seconds. If you make it 25 seconds, what will end up happening is you will start to see the stars have moved. Even with 20 seconds, you will actually see some movement, but it's not as visible. The longer you obviously expose, the more stars and brighter the stars will be. But the problem is you'll start to see them as streaks rather than points. So you do not want to go for a longer than what the rule suggests. If you really don't want to see any streak, then I would say follow the 400 rule. And in that one, you simply divide 400 by the focal length again. And in this case, if I'm using a 25 millimeter lens on full frame, that's 16 seconds. Now, here's the challenge for the APS-C folks. This rule or 25 millimeter lens behaves like on a APS-C behaves like a 37.5. So you are actually further dividing it by 1.5. So if you're using a 20 for prime, you can shoot for 20 seconds. If you're using the 25 millimeter lens on APS-C, then you have to further divide this 20 by 1.5. So it comes to maybe about 13 seconds, 13.3 seconds. So 13 to 14 seconds is what you can manage with a APS-C 25. So you want to go even wider lens to compensate for it, or you have to increase your ISO. But you still want to shoot no longer than 13 seconds. Okay. ISO will generally you'll have to set between 3200 to 6400 when you are using f2.8. So earlier I probably didn't, I don't know if I said it, but if you are shooting APS-C, I would say try to use a lens that is f1.4 to f2. So you do not need to go as high ISO as you can on a full frame. Most of the pictures I take are actually 6400, 5000 to 6400 ISO. Now, many of the cameras are ISO neutral, so you can actually shoot at any ISO and then raise the ISO later in, especially if you're shooting raw. Actually, only if you're shooting raw, you can do that. But as a general rule, you have to follow no worse than 500 rule, where you divide the focal length, and if you are using APS-C, further divide it by 1.5 to see how long you can shoot. And your ISO will be 3200 to 6400 range. Normally, obviously, if you want brighter, you can always increase it even more, or use a faster lens than 2.8. I usually use 2.8 because those are my landscape lenses also. All of my wide lenses are 2.8. All right. Moving on to white balance. So as I was trying to cover earlier, because of the light pollution, um, the image will usually come out a little warmer than you would want. Sky is not supposed to be brown or orangish. It's supposed to be on the darker bluish, darker black side. So how you compensate for it basically the same thing you would probably do at a wedding, which is maybe you have a lot of or Diwali decorations where a white ball will come across as orange light. So you compensate for it by making cooler temperature in your white balance. If it is too much light pollution, I would say 3500 to 3600 Kelvin. If you can set your white balance, auto white balance. Now, obviously, if you're shooting raw, you can make these changes later also. Less light pollution, if it is not as light polluted, maybe 4000 to 4400 Kelvin color temperature. So if you need any assistance on how to change, let me know of your camera model, and I can talk to you about it in our WhatsApp groups, or you can just send a message to me directly. Okay. Now, this is the previous page where we are talking about 400, 500 rule is actually good for um, single shot mode. You can actually take multiple shots and have shorter bursts. So I can, instead of a 120-second shot, I can probably take 2 or 3 10, 15-second shots. And that will allow me to, and then I will merge them together, stack them in Photoshop. And that's how you can get brighter image, even though you did not expose long enough. In fact, doing that, you can also, if you do say 10, 15, 20 frames, you may be able to ISO much lower, 800 ISO, 1600 ISO instead of 6400 ISO. So if you do stacking, that's what you can do. Okay. You can also use a tracker. Now, trackers are not cheap, but not very expensive either. Depends. And these trackers will actually they track the motion of the Earth. So once you mount it, they are actually following the stars. and the stars. So doing that will allow you to expose for a long time without having to worry about that 500, 400 rule. We can cover that at some point if you want to, but just know that these options also exist. So if you don't have a tracker, you can still stack by taking multiple shots and then overlaying them, stacking them in Photoshop. Just make sure you don't move anything so that the tripod is sturdy. Okay. So I see at least one question already. Anukriti, what is the question? Anybody else have questions? Go ahead and type it in the chat box. You can always, if you don't have any questions at this time, you can always reach out to me, and I have Instagram. I actually have two.
Anyone, any questions? My data is very, very bad today.
If you don't have any questions at this time, you can always reach out to me, and I have Instagram. I actually have two. So you can see Illuminer IG is actually one I'm.
Anupriti, are you still there?
क्या हो गया रजनीश? You can always reach out to me, and I have Instagram. I actually have two. Best
So
Nikon.
you can see Illuminer IG.
I will have to look because I shoot with Sony, so I'm not very familiar with what options you have. But who is I will that one through our WhatsApp group. I only see Facebook user as the name, so I'm not sure who is asking that question. Who's that? Or I will just follow up and I will post that message on our WhatsApp group. Any other question? It's hard for me to hear actually. And you can always message me through Instagram also. If you follow, I'll follow back, and then we can exchange messages. Any questions you might have on, obviously, on astrophotography, modeling, or any genre of photography. We can discuss that. So, if you follow, I'll follow back, and then we can exchange messages. Any questions you might have on, obviously, on astro. Okay. All right, Kshitij, I will keep that in mind. I'll look up, ask my Nikon friends, and then I'll get an answer for you. Anybody else? Any questions on using the apps or shooting single shot versus stacking them? But do make sure to download those couple of apps, one to figure out where the stars are, and one to see where the light pollution looks like. And that will actually be a good start. And then just practice. Hope you get lucky when actually it is a clear sky. The moon is at its lowest and not around the full moon days, because that's really not going to help much. And you do have to drive a little bit. I actually end up driving maybe about 200 kilometers. That gray spot I showed you is actually about 200 kilometers from my home. So it does require timing, and you end up spending pretty much all night. And that's the other thing you have to do is you have to um, uh, do is plan. Okay, another thing I probably should share on that aspect is in for 6 months is the galactic time frame is probably we have about 6 months because of the location of our sun. Right now, from about late March till November, we actually can see the galaxy better. During winter, the sun actually aligns with the galaxy. So the galactic arm is actually behind the sun. So we cannot, even though it is there, we cannot see it. So these are the 6 months you have to plan. Uh, you also should know that the timing will continue to change as we go into um, later in the month. Right now, you probably have to wait until 10 or 12 p.m. at night. It may be actually a different time. And the galaxy will also show up at different angles over time. Right now, it's pretty much parallel to Earth's horizon. It will start to get more vertical. So there are a lot of things that happen over these months. So, but that Stellarium app will actually show you, and you can even play with the dates and see how it will look at particular day on a particular time, and that will always help you plan on how you want to shoot. I will say is try to get once you are comfortable shooting stars, and if you want to play with stacking, what you can do is actually I should have put a picture up here. There's a place called Marfa, which is not far from here. Actually, it's about 3 hours, 3 4 hours. That place has I think it's a Gucci Prada store. There is nothing in. It's basically just jungle. Well, not I shouldn't say jungle. It's a plain desert. There is one building that is standing. It's a Prada store, but it's not really a Prada store. It says Prada and it has a few display items, and it's middle of nowhere. That's not a shop, but it's actually a kind of a setting, and it's a popular spot to take photographs. It's very dark. Now there is light on the Prada store. So what people normally do is they expose for the Prada store, and then they expose for the sky, and then they also expose for the inside of the store. So you actually have three shots, and you can stack them, and it will look like you have this galaxy up on top, and you also have the store, and you actually can see into the store as well. So if you take a 20-second shot, the light inside the Prada store will basically blow out everything. So it will be blown out, so you will not get the details. So you can be creative. Once you start learning stacking, you can actually be creative and do all that stuff. So it's more like the HDR effect. So you have to have very long shutter speed for the stars, but very short shutter speed for the inside of the store, which is lit. And you stack the two together to get the best effect. Okay. And thank you. Thanks, everybody. I see some compliments, which is always encouraging. And I will organize you might have in mind and in the future. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me in any way, Instagram or WhatsApp, and we'll go from there. If you have any other questions, if you don't, then we can end this. I know it's already late. For some reason, I was messed up thinking it's 9:30 for you guys is 8 a.m. for me. So that was I was actually online 3 hours ahead of time. So next time we can do a bit earlier. For some reason, I was messed up thinking it's.
Thank you, Manish. Thank you very much. And
All
yes,
right,
I
thank
said
you all.
very bad today, so I cannot say speak much.
Okay. All right. I'll see you.